Welcome to episode 111 of the Sports Geek podcast. This week, something different. Blair Hughes interviews me on all things Sports Geek.
Welcome to the Sports Geek podcast, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals.
And now, here's your host who lists his favorite sports as the one you work in, Sean Callanan.
Thank you, DJ Joel. My name is Sean Callanan, and you are listening to the Sports Geek podcast. And you're doing that either on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or my favourite podcast app, Pocket Casts. I keep saying, and I've converted a few people, if you're on iTunes, if you're on Apple or Android, Pocket Cast is the best podcasting app out there, and it's built in South Australia, so I like to support Australian-developed apps. My name is Sean Callanan, at Sean Callanan on all platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. Send me a snap. I'm trying to create a Snapchat story every day. If you missed the one 2 days ago, too bad. That's how Snapchat works. You've got to tune in every single day to find out. I might even record a bit of Snapchat during this conversation. It's going to be a little bit different. Normally I do this intro after I've done an interview, but in this case, I do get a few people pinging me via Twitter and emails, and occasionally via the Snapchat on actually getting myself interviewed. So rather than being the interviewer, today I'm going to be the interviewee. Very happy to welcome Blair Hughes, Mr. Blair Hughes, as he's known on Twitter. Head of operations in Australia for Audio Boom. So he loves his audio, loves his podcasting. Blair, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Sean. Thanks for having me here. I'm glad to be able to interview you. I know I've wanted to be able to tell your story for a long time, and I know a lot of people want to be able to hear about, the origins of yourself and also Sports Geek. So it's great to be able to sit down, do this interview, and have some fans out there of sports, and also the podcast learn a lot more about yourself and everything here.
Yeah, so it was very much a case of we caught up, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, early January. We were both really going with that work hard in January. It really sets up your year, and we had a conversation, and I just kicked myself after it. I said, we should have recorded that. That would have been a really good podcast. So when I thought of, someone needs to interview me, I thought Blair would be the person to do it. So
look, I'm no Mike Munro or Andrew Denton, but we'll try to make this as much as this is your life or enough rope as possible.
I know. I'm now connected to a lie detector test. So if you hear loud spiking noises, that's when I'm lying. So yeah, I guess what I can say is I'm very happy for you to interview me, and
I'm happy to be here and do it as well. All right. Well, look, another reason I thought we'd do this. It's a great educational thing for young people, especially out there as well, who are entering the sports business, or even people wanting to know a lot more about audio and podcasting, to hear your story. So, I've put a couple of questions here. I've asked a couple of other people, what they'd want to ask as well. But I think, to start it off, to really sort of look back a bit at your background.
Yep.
How did all this start? We'll go into Sports Geek in a minute, kind of thing. But how did your love affair with sports and being a fan, and then perhaps with audio as well, all start? But let's go back to the start. You as a kid, you in sports.
So I guess my sports background is I was a pretty active kid. I played pretty much like most kids in Australia. I played most sports, played footy in the winter and cricket in the summer. I was an aspiring leg spin bowler back in the day.
Do you remember your best figures?
I think I took 4 for 12.
That's not bad, that's good.
Bowling leg spin, and I think 8 of those runs were byes when the wicket keeper missed the wrong one. So I think I was a 12-year-old playing in under 16s up in Edenhope in regional Victoria. People just could not pick it out of the back of their hand. So I played cricket and footy, and then my mum loved basketball, and so she got myself and my brother playing basketball at probably around grade 6, so probably at 10 or 11 I started playing basketball, and that became my sport of choice. I sort of played that all the way through high school, and then into adulthood, and played at uni. When I came down to Melbourne, I like to say that I played in the Australian National Championship game at collegiate level, and I love saying that to Americans because they would think about NCAA. It's not like that in Australia, the Australian university games. It's very competitive, but there's probably a bit more focus on the beer drinking in between games than there is the basketball. So it's not the same as Andrew Gay's playing in the Final Four for Seton Hall. But
as you talk about, I imagine that was probably the late 80s, early 90s kind of thing, when you were, had a big fixation with NBL and with NBA as well. I mean, I remember that as well, and especially collecting, trading cards and things like that back in those 90s when that was a huge era for NBA. Not saying it isn't now, but even NBL was huge, back there, and it's coming back, as we both know how big NBL's come back in Australia. But and so keep going in terms of
So
that sports fan love.
I was a big basketball fan. I was a big fan of the NBL in its heyday. When I came down to Melbourne to university, that was 1991. Me and my brother and I had followed the Ballarat Miners. We were based in Ballarat.
But they would have had a good team logo. Yeah.
They had a good team logo. They had a good coach. Brian Gorgon was coach of the Miners when I was there, and they had a lot of success. So I grabbed a few of my mates and we started going to the Melbourne Tigers games, talking about trading cards. During uni, I was running a trading card store. So
of course you were Sports Geek, of course.
That's where the Sports Geek business cards come from. I've still got a lot of trading cards lying around. So if you haven't got a Sports Geek business card, it's pretty much a trading card with a sticker on the back says, "These are my details."
I think a sports trading card podcast is another side project for this as well. So
well, I've only got so many hours in the day. So I was a big fan of the NBL and the NBA. In those heydays, the Jordan, the 90s, when both the NBL was big, packed houses in. At Rod Laver Arena and things like that. So I think I was at, if you look at the NBL records of the top 10 attendance matches, they would have been in that time. I would have been at all of those games. So I was a sports fan, and then the other side of it was I came down to university to do a Bachelor of Information Technology. I had skills with computers. I was able to get luckily a scholarship at Swinburne, and that
what was the internship in? Scholarship, sorry.
Bachelor of Infotech.
Yep, Bachelor of Infotech.
So I was lucky enough to get paid to go to uni, which is very, very rare in Australia. And it helped pay for beer and rent effectively.
That's all you need at uni.
It is. That gets you through uni. But the whole time I was doing some stuff, volunteering with the Melbourne Tigers, helping them with game entertainment and things like that in the NBL. So that was sort of where I started, to scratch that itch around being involved in sport. And
it's interesting you say about your mum being a big basketball fan, big sports fan. Obviously, we know, our parents are some of the first ones that get us into either playing sport or taking us to a game. And obviously there, this idea that how did you then, I guess, turn that love affair and figure out this could be a career, working in sports or working in the sports business? You say, a little bit of work there on game day. How did you first make those kind of networks and find, this is where I want to go and this is how I want to get there?
I guess I was around... I'd nearly finished my Bachelor of Infotech, and to me, computers was easy. Like I could do it. I could code, and I understood it. I nearly quit uni at, I think it was around 21, about to finish the course, and I was about to just chuck it all in and just go work in sport.
Yeah. Yep.
And I really didn't care too much. I won't say common sense prevailed, but I sort of got talked out of that. And went into a career in IT. And one of the things that I sort of said early on in my IT career is, I was entering the IT industry pre-Y2K, right? And the Y2K bug and everything around it caused every single person working in the industry to get paid far too much money, right? Yep. And so I was in that space of consulting and programmer in that space. I was a trainer early on, and then I went into being a coder and sort of running development teams, and it was very lucrative. And so for 5 or 6 years, I focused on that, and I was still a sports fan. I was going to the NBL, I was going to Collingwood games, those kind of things.
Still trying to do things with teams or talk to teams. I was
still doing volunteer type of stuff, but now
a good experience though doing those things. Anyone that wants to get into this industry, I mean, you have to start from the bottom, and you have to get your hands dirty and those kind of things. And
so to a certain degree, I was sort of building a network and potentially saying, I'd like to go and work there, but the pay, the pay in IT made the leap very, very hard. So in the late, let me try to get these dates right. In the late 90s, I with a sports lawyer friend of mine that we'd connected via the Melbourne Tigers, we started looking at TV shows for sports teams at the time around community TV. We thought there was an opportunity there to produce a TV show for sports teams and effectively create more inventory, as we know it is now, and giving sponsors some more access, behind the scenes access. So in the late 90s, we did a pilot TV show with the Western Bulldogs, which is an AFL team out here, and it was effectively Western Bulldogs version of talking footy. A host, couch, a guest.
Was that one of the first in Australia to sort of do one of those kind of community TV shows? Yeah,
well, it was the first club show.
Yeah, right. Wow.
It was the first club show in Australia, and so we did a 4-week run in the 1998 final series.
Wow.
Right,
yep.
And so.
Where's that now, on VHS somewhere? Or
there's still a few clips of that on YouTube.
On YouTube, right, there you go. All right.
Sometimes I get different responses, but we were the first people to give Caroline Wilson her first TV exposure.
That's notable. That's
and some people want to punch me in the face when they know that. So and we had Wayne Jackson, the CEO of the AFL at the time, on the show, and
you identified it was a content idea. It's
exactly
smart,
and so
ahead of its time doing that.
So the pitch was to do that for 4 weeks, prove that it's a good model, and then push it out as a 20-week show going forward, and they'll have a whole bunch of deliverables for their sponsors. We didn't get paid for that, but what we did get, we got paid in contra, which is, if you work in sport, you know the word contra. But luckily, working with Mark, who's a sports lawyer, he got us a great deal. And what we did is our contra was to tag along on their sports study trip. So it was effectively, you've probably heard me talk about the Sports Geek trip before. That was effectively the first one. So we went over with some Bulldogs from the Western Bulldogs, some executives. So Brian Royal, Jim Edmund, Paul Armstrong, to name a few. And we went to Toronto, Indianapolis, Denver and Seattle in the space of 10 days.
Incredible professional development trip, obviously, for you guys to do this.
And so it sort of started the relationship of meeting some of the key people, and some of the people that I've spoken to on the podcast. Dan Butterley at the Mountain West Conference. We met Dan when we went through Denver, and he's become a good friend and a client over the years. So that was a real eye opener, and so Mark and I from that set up a sports company. And again, we had an IT guy and a lawyer, both well paid in what they were doing, and it was sort of a side gig. And we were trying a few things to say, can we get this sort of idea up and running? So the trip was great. The unfortunate thing that happened in that off season is Foxtel did a deal with the AFL to start Fox Footy and start coverage. And part of that deal is they gave every team a club show.
Yep.
And it absolutely torpedoed the idea.
You were first, though. You guys were first. So remember that.
It is good but effectively then everyone got a show, and which was fine. But they were short lived. They didn't continue to do it. So our focus was really building out that content as we would know it now, and making sure it was appropriately commercialised. So it sort of put a dampener on the plans that we had.
Well, I want to add something there though, because there's people that are looking for careers in sports, or kids at university and those kind of colleges that are looking at this kind of industry and whatnot. But what you've said there is a huge thing, that fan-generated content. You know, you guys had an idea and you realised that, okay, how can we get in? How can we do something? And this is a great lesson, I think, Sean, for people out there that are thinking, how do I get started or whatnot? You know, find a niche or find something interesting like you guys obviously did, 15-odd years ago or whenever it was. You found that and then you were able to talk with the team and get it done and, you know, the Foxtel thing or whatever kind of thing, but it's a great success story and then what did it lead to? That professional development, which is then
I mean, the big outcomes of that was, one, the study trip was awesome, and making some connections with people at the Seattle Seahawks or the Hamilton Tiger Cats or the Indianapolis Colts, and definitely the Mountain West, and that relationship with Dan enabled us to do a fan analysis study. So at that time, the Mountain West, and again, if you go back to the episode that I did with Dan, the Mountain West was a new conference, a new college conference. So they didn't know a lot about their fans because they were effectively 8 colleges that are banded together, and they didn't really have a lot of data. Okay. Now we hear big data, and this is back in early 2000, big data wasn't a thing. And so what we did, working with another friend of ours, Murray Heron, who had a real strong focus around data analysis and geospatial data and things like that. So we ran some surveys of 3 of the colleges, Wyoming, UNLV, and the third one escapes, SDSU, San Diego State. And so we surveyed a bunch of their fans and came back with a report on, sponsor avidity, how much... how much their identity was tied to the team or to the conference. Just on those,
how were you doing those 16 years ago, for the first time with these?
So a lot of those were done, they were web-based. Like you would do it now with SurveyMonkey or something like that. But I still remember, and I probably still got them in my attic somewhere, when we asked one of the teams, can you send us your list? And we got this dot matrix printout, reams of printouts, and the paper that has the blue lines and white lines. We got that. That was their list. We said, send us your list, and they sent us like reams of paper. So we did a lot of that. That data. It was really rudimentary at that stage.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But to take it from there, and then you hear what Dan's doing now, doing surveys with iPads around the stadium. It's leaps and bounds. But that report for the Mountain West was really vital in helping them secure their ESPN TV deal, because they were able to have a bit more information about their fans. So Sports Fan Data sort of was the company at that time. And again, it was a bit stop and start, didn't have the full focus of us. Now that if I knew what I know now, I would have pushed things harder and made the leap.
But this was a light bulb moment back then, though, for you, that you knew that this is going to be a career. Again,
it was a scratching the surface and going up, sort of getting a few wins in the space. But it was just a matter of figuring out exactly where I fit. But I guess that's all the pre-Sports Geek sports stuff that I did. And as I sort of said to people, when I sort of started Sports Geek, I thought I would be like an IT consultant and a web developer and a guide in that space, because that'd be my skill set. But I finished up my last job, coding job with the guys at DevTest around in 2009. And I thought now was time. I wanted to really give this idea a crack. And so that started by me telling people they needed a sports geek. And, part of that was blogging, part of that was networking, meeting people, finding out, what my brand was, even coming up with the name. I started doing it and didn't know what the name. And then someone said, Sports Geek, and that name sort of stuck because it sort of fit for what I was trying to do. And then it just, kept going from there. Sort of, it was really early on. It was telling people, telling teams, and leaning on the case studies coming out of the US and the UK, saying this is what the teams are doing in Australia. You need to do that. And then I was lucky to have a couple of key early clients, being the Manly Sea Eagles in the NRL and Collingwood. In the AFL, that were sort of
you just picked your favourite teams and went after them. Is that right?
Well, not exactly. They both came different ways. So yes, I'm a Collingwood fan. My great granddad played for Collingwood back in 1910. So I didn't really have a choice. My dad's a Collingwood supporter, so I'm a Collingwood supporter.
Yep. My granddad just followed Collingwood just because of the black and white on TV. So yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So I mean, my mum and dad had a prenup because my mum barracks for Richmond, so my sister barracks for Richmond, but all the boys we all barracked for Collingwood. So that's how fanatical the AFL is in Australia. It normally goes down that way. So, I mean, Manly, for one, came from a speaking opportunity that I did in Sydney. Then Sarah Brady, who was working at Manly at the time, their IT guy just left.
Yeah.
And their IT guy was the one that was keeping an eye on things that are social.
There you go.
And Sarah was in charge of marketing and membership, really, being a membership-focused team and trying to get into that space. She gave me a call and said, look, our IT guy's gone. We don't know what to do in this space. Can you give us a hand? And so at that time, Sarah was there, Jess Ivers, who's gone on to work at the Bulldogs and then at the Aussie Open. She was, working on reception there. So really lack of resources and so I helped them out on what they can do in social and things like that, how they can sell tickets, how they can build membership. And then, so that's where that lead came from to sort of start in the NRL. From the AFL point of view, I pretty much went to Collingwood, and I went to Collingwood more as a fan and sort of said, hey guys, I'm a fan.
Yeah.
I know the numbers that are out there.
Yeah.
And this is August 2010. I think Collingwood had 50,000 Facebook fans.
Yeah. And
to a certain degree, I just called them out and I said, that's not a big enough number.
Yeah,
I think that there's a bigger number there. And so I sort of I've got to draw a line in the sand moment. I said, look, if you follow what I do for the next 6 weeks away from the grand final, I said, I reckon we can get to 100,000.
Yeah.
I sort of promise that we'll double it, but you've got to do what I say.
Yeah.
And they took the leap as well and said, cool, we'll give this guy a go.
Yep, that's great.
And 6 weeks later, yes, 2 grand finals, a drawn one.
Yeah.
They hit that. And it was really about, and again, light bulb moment for me to say, well, the stuff that I've been saying, does work.
Yeah.
And it was starting just to get them treating the platform, in this case, it was a Facebook, play, treating the platform how the fans treated it, and giving them the opportunity to celebrate. And obviously when success happens, you want to be there to capitalise on it.
That's right.
and allow them to cheer. And that was the main, I guess, tactical change that we did with the Pies. And from there, I had a case study to hang my hat on.
Yes, absolutely.
And then had a few more teams call up, and it sort of it's been that way. Snowball from there. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go into the podcast in a second, but talk about. You've talked about the start of, Sports Geek and services and whatnot kind of thing that you've provided, but talk a bit about, what Sports Geek does now in 2016, but also some of the great case studies, success stories that you've done as well, if you can, talk about those.
So it has changed, obviously. Digital has changed pretty much in the last 6 years. I can't remember which podcast it is, but, digital years are like dog years. I think every year is like 7. So early on, there was a lot of training, hand-holding, instructing on how to use, like the how-to. How do I tweet?
Yeah.
What's a hashtag?
Yeah.
What should we do? That kind of thing. How should we post? Should we do images? Should we do links? How do I do short links? All of that kind of stuff. Over the years, that capacity by the people who are doing the execution has lifted, right? You're not hiring someone that doesn't use the platform. That kind of thing. I'm still answering those questions, and I sort of pride myself in the fact that I say there's no dumb question, right? Because just you can't have that assumed knowledge and you should know what I know.
Yeah.
So I'm still answering some of those questions, but it's less and less of that training. And so now I'm more in the way I pitch myself in is digital strategist on call.
Yeah.
So a lot of sports teams or brands don't have the resources to have someone to be overseeing their digital and sort of providing that guidance around campaigns and that kind of thing. And so that's the role I fill. So I normally come in sort of early season, or in the off season, to discuss what they're trying to do and achieve from a content point of view, and how they want to engage fans and what fans they want to engage, and then also look at the commercial stuff, and the commercial realities of getting more results out of digital, and that's what I want. I want to see my clients get more digital revenue. And so I've seen a shift probably in the last 3 years of spending less and less time with the digital team, because they've got the capacity, right? And we're working on planning new platforms, those kind of things. But they've got the capacity. If we said, "Hey, do a video series," they can do it. Or let's engage more on this platform, they can do it. And once you've sort of set the plan, they can do it. And spending more and more time with the ticketing side, selling tickets, like with the Asian Cup this time last year, sold a lot of those tickets via Facebook, and that was real lesson in end result type of stuff. Yeah. And then also spending more time building up the digital capabilities in the commercial and sponsorship team. So as Mike Connolly said on a recent podcast, the sponsorship guys are so used to selling spots and dots, right? The sponsorship and the inventory. And digital is this new thing. In Australia, it's you're selling the signage on the ground, or the signage on the jersey, as well as the hospitality. Whereas where does digital fit? So that's been a little bit confusing for the commercial side of the business, because they haven't grown up in the real fast evolving space in the last 5 years.
Yes,
so they don't know how to. What do we charge for a Facebook post, or how much is this piece of content worth, or if we were to run a campaign, how might that run? So that's something that's definitely evolving. I'm seeing more and more teams evolve. Yeah.
And is it sort of major teams and grassroots teams as well that you're helping, and all the way through, or more sort of major teams? And
so the answer is yes.
Yeah. Because it is resources, you're right. It's funny. We've both been overseas and talked with teams and things like that, and been to conferences where head of ticketing will get up and say, "Oh, we've got 100 people here that work in our ticketing teams," and in Australia there might be 2 or 3 people that work on digital teams and things like that, versus over there a lot more. So and fans think that there's.
So that was one of the big insights at SEAT last year. Sports have these massive brands, right? They're in the paper every day. Their brand value is huge. So if you were to compare, let's just as an example, compare the Lakers and Coca-Cola, like they're right there level. But the resources that Coca-Cola has compared to the Lakers or Real Madrid or us, it's ridiculous. Yeah. So there's this expectation from the fans that, you're massive, you should have a lot of resources. And yes, there are teams that do have a lot of resources, but they're not at the same level as major brands that are, rolling out, digital activations and things like that. So it's always, sport's always a space where you've got to make enough of the resources you've got and stretch them to the limit. Yeah. And then, in some cases, until they break. I think where I help is I give good visibility of the resources and the capacity and what the team is producing. And so if someone says we need more video, I can say, well, the video team is stretched. It can't produce any more, but we know the video will produce this much in revenue because we've got our commercial guys across the line in understanding how to sell it. Yeah. It's a much easier equation going back to a CMO or a CEO and saying, we need another video person, knowing that this person's going to cost 60, 70, 80, 100K. Who knows, what market it's in. Yeah. And it becomes an equation of, if we get that person at 80K to produce this piece of, these content items, that we can turn it around for 200K as an example. Yep. So you want to, I'm always looking to do that, and I want to see my digital teams have great success and grow. That's right. I joke that when I started, there were teams of 1 and 2 that were running digital, and now there are teams of 10. Now that doesn't happen, if it's not making money.
That's right.
Right, and so we're seeing more and more teams become their own media platforms, whether it be, in all forms, whether it be written content, video content, audio content, and it should be the first port of call for all your fans. So being able to appropriately resource that and appropriately commercialise that's what's going to continue to drive the success.
Yes, yeah. No, that's a great recap of what.
There we go. I'm telling the audio guy to keep the microphone pointed to his mouth.
I'm too busy. I'm in the Sports Geek office looking at all these great stuff in the Isaiah Thomas trading cards. I'm just getting bombarded by Sports Geek stuff here.
That's all right. James will clean it up and make you sound terrific.
All right. So we've talked about Sports Geek and the services you provide and what you do there and how it all started. What about the podcast? How did this all get started and where was this an idea? You've been a podcaster for a long time now. Before all this revolution or podcast revolution and all came back and whatnot last couple of years, how did it get started and why?
So I sort of toyed around with the idea of doing a podcast for I reckon around 18 months. So I'd done radio. I did community radio on Southern FM for about 2 years, just a general sports chat show on a Sunday afternoon. But I did about 100 hours of that, like 2 hours, 2 hours a weekend, being able to talk about any topic. So I got my reps in there. I was pretty comfortable doing radio. And I also was doing a couple of radio spots. I ended up sort of stopped doing the community stuff and I started doing spots with Francis Leach at ABC and Daniel Harth at SEN. So again, I was doing that audio piece and I was putting those pieces up on the site, and I find I'm, as much as I stumble right now, and just to provide context, I can't write, right? I don't find it doesn't come naturally to me. But I feel like I can talk. Like when you said, "Here's the questions," I'm like, "Just tell me what." I'm not too fussed what you ask me. Exactly. I'm going to say what I'm going to say.
We haven't even got to the hard stuff yet.
Yeah. So I can. So I'm pretty comfortable in that space. And so I was putting up the clips of my spots on the radio, and it, I hadn't really dived in on how to get it, and I had made it a podcast, so it was in iTunes of like, here's the clips.
Yeah.
I'd been listening to Pat Flynn with the Smart Passive Income podcast, and then I saw him at Social Media Marketing World in 2013, and he pretty much outlined a presentation on how to do a podcast. I went, cool, I'm just going to follow that recipe to the letter.
Yeah.
And so I started repurposing my radio bits. So I had one or two radio segments. I stitched it together. I'd do some intro, some outro. And then I started moving that to, I'll get some interviews on the radio. And so I had a few guests be on the radio at the ABC and Josh, or that would send us the clip afterwards. So guys like Richard Clark at Arsenal and Todd Cafflish and stuff would be on the radio down here. And then it sort of evolved in that I was cool doing that, but I wanted to have a deeper dive convo than a 15-minute grab with Francis.
Yep.
And so I just started doing more of the interviews, offline or off radio, and just doing it straight for the podcast. And it was pretty much a way of, me purposing up my content. It's a classic repurposing case where I was taking two grabs. And it became, a way for me to connect with, my audience. I'm pretty blatant when I say Sports Geek Podcast is for my clients, my past ones, my future ones.
Absolutely.
And my current ones. I'm really chuffed to have my clients, who are paying for my time and, call me up and ask questions, are still listening to the podcast and finding it of use.
That's right. And Sean, you've got to be proud of obviously what you've achieved with Sports Geek, in terms of sports business and podcasts that are out there in the audio world. I mean, it's a very, very valuable resource that people have to be able to listen back and as it's evolved over the years as well, listening to the different themes and things like that as well. So
I mean, and I'm very humbled and blown away when I have, people I respect in the industry tell me that, that they say, they listen or they appreciate the content that I put out, because it's not what I expected, and I'll have a quick shout out to Richard Clark at Arsenal, but to have him, he sent me an email saying he was listening, and I'm like, wow, here's Richard, he's head of digital at Arsenal, and he's listening to the podcast. And that was sort of I must be doing something right. It's hitting the mark with, my audience. I'm more than happy if you're not working in sport or you're just in digital and you are listening. Thank you very much for listening. But it's when I have, connections with people who do listen, and I guess as I've done it more and more, I guess the familiarity when I catch up with people, either that I've met before or that I know, and like if I've gone to Seek now the last 5 years, people have catch up with me, or I meet them once a year, but they've been, they spent 40 hours with me over the year. So it's been really effective in that way to really connect with who I want to connect with.
Have you been surprised with the rise of audio and podcasting again in the last, and now how teams have jumped on it, not just in other media or entertainment? Or
I'm not going to say surprised, because I was hoping that and sort of saw the trend. I think there's been a couple of real light bulb moments for podcasting, and it has been around for a long while. Like I chatted with Micah Hart, and I haven't decided whether it's before this episode or next episode. He set up the Hang Time podcast at MBA, in podcasting term ages ago, like 7-8 years ago. And it's only been in this last 3 years that it's sort of, gone, truly mainstream. People like Bill Simmons and what he did with Grantland, the guys at Gimlet Media and what they're doing with Startup and the podcast they're producing. And then you have something like Serial that becomes, water cooler, you must listen, kind of stuff. And if you're not listening, you're not in on the the cool stuff.
Correct.
And and then having things like Apple set up a specific podcast app, it starts becoming mainstream. And I think in the next 12 to 18 months, it's only going to become more mainstream. More car integration.
Absolutely
the CarPlay stuff that Apple's doing. And we're moving to this on-demand world. Netflix, all the streaming services, Spotify, it fits perfectly in that. And podcasts are going to be added to Spotify,
and especially from the commercial perspective as well, with more and more advertisers moving to this area as well, away from traditional media and traditional advertising. There, it's incredible.
And it is an easy content piece to monetize, because you really, and it's easy to explain. It's time-shifted radio. That's if someone doesn't understand it. And as you said, there's a lot of advertisers doing a lot of work and doing really well in podcasting, and the fact is that if you're a podcast listener, all the cool podcast advertisers, because they're all on a lot of the podcasts. So and it's a real intimate medium. People are either running right now, or they're in the gym, or they're in the car. You've got their full attention. I'm not a listener of podcasts in the background when I'm working, because I can't give them my full attention. So I'm listening when I'm walking to work or when I'm flying, that kind of thing, but you get my full attention. And so from an advertiser point of view, that's really really advantageous. And I do think, there's more and more options from a team point of view. And even if you take that greatest hits type approach to say, here's the press conference, here's a major interview for the week, and wrap it up and tie it in a bow and call it 30 to 40 minutes, you can now get the metrics, you can see what the downloads are, you can, it can be clipped and snippets can be put in different places. It's really flexible. And want to talk, going back to that resource issue, if someone says create 40 minutes of audio and someone says create 4 minutes of video, right, you're still way in front with 40 minutes of audio, because in this case we've hit record, at the end we'll hit stop, and James will spend the time he does have to clean it up and things like that and put the intro, but it doesn't take it doesn't take the time that it does to produce,
That's
a
right.
2 or 3 minute video.
And, it is interesting. I'm sure you're talking to teams as well about, having podcasts or thinking about having a podcast or even just doing audio snippets and things like that. But, from my perspective, working with teams and being a sports fan as well, 5 years ago, podcasting was not something that teams were doing. But with the teams we work with now, it's incredible to see that they've embraced it and they're using it as something.
Well, that's the thing. I think this is with Audio Boom, and I think that's where there's a lot of low hanging fruit and content that's not purposed. So, radio interviews, press conferences, this content that is getting produced, but I can't be sitting there watching a press conference while I'm at work.
Yep.
But I can be listening to a press conference, or I can hear the interview that one of the star players had on a radio station, and whether that's capturing it via social and listening to it there and then, or when I'm on the site, I just hit play. It's embeddable and it keeps time on site, that kind of thing. I think that's the opportunity, and then I think you've got the next level thing, which is doing a specific podcast that is. Player interviewing player, or there's so many different options and variations in there. And the fact, I'm really buoyed by the fact that you've got Bill Simmons with his HBO setting up another network. You've got people like Adrian Wojnarowski setting up The Vertical, and again having an athlete on a podcast with JJ Redick having his own podcast.
There's been a couple of good articles as well in the last few weeks, even talking about athletes, getting in and doing a podcast, and more teams getting in doing podcasts, and that's brilliant to see as well, especially for yourself, doing a podcast.
And that's something that it's been something I was working on last year and didn't get around to, and it's something I want to get to this year. I think there is an opportunity for athletes to have their own voice. So, there's a network play, that I'm working on at Sports Geek. It's just a matter of capacity and setting some time aside, but I think that can... I'm hopeful that it'll be up and running in 2016.
Okay, well, let's talk about 2016. Let's talk about what's the future for Sports Geek, whether it's this year or moving on, and even Chunky Media. I want to hear a bit about what that is and how that's a bit different from what you're doing with Sports Geek as well. Yeah,
so 2016, so as you just mentioned there, Chunky Media, you may have heard me talk about that on my Twitter feed or on my Snapchat. I've set up another business with a good mate of mine, Steve Vallis, who is one of the guys on Beers Blokes Business podcast with me. He has got a real strong e-commerce focus, has worked with a couple of different brands, but works with the guys at the Internet Conference, and really knows the e-commerce user experience space really well. And we've both got a passion for the social advertising sort of space. So all the stuff that I've been doing at Sports Geek around helping sell tickets and playing in that space around Facebook ads and the social advertising component, Steve's been my sort of sounding board for a lot of that stuff. And so we kept having these conversations about where we saw businesses and brands moving, where we saw a gap of capacity and what agencies were able to deliver. And agencies and businesses overall, sort of selling consulting, we're sort of selling that community. Yeah. It's all about community. Build a crowd around your brand.
And interesting, we're going to talk a bit about fan engagement, fan experience and all that.
And I want to finish this point because I don't want anyone to think that I'm on that boat. We're not on that boat.
Yeah.
Community doesn't sell. Community is hard yakka. There's a lot of effort for not little reward.
Yeah.
And so what Chunky is about shortening that sales process and using social to do that. Right? There is a direct line between your brand and your customers. They don't want to see 700 photos that say, like this post, here's a cute rabbit.
Yeah.
If they want to buy something that you've got, you've just got to serve them with the appropriate content at the right time. Yeah. And so all the stuff that I've learnt at Sports Geek, working with sports brands and their sponsors, I know it works in other verticals.
Exactly, yeah.
But I can't, no one's going to hire someone called Sports Geek for their charity or their app or whatever. So what Chunky has allowed me to do and Steve to do is to put our shingle out and push out our name and brand and offering under that brand.
Yeah.
And so it started really well. We pretty much, I guess, kicked things off around September last year. We planned to do some stuff earlier. We planned to do things a bit bigger last year. Unfortunately, Steve's dad wasn't very well, and it sort of derailed things. And so we just sort of put it on pause. And then once we've put some effort behind it, it's getting some good traction. So the idea is I'll be doing the same work and sort of having sort of this shared services model where Sports Geek and Chunky can sort of serve the same clients.
Yeah.
And give the work that I'm doing a bit more scale. So that's going to be a focus, and sort of keeping that dual focus of still working in the sports space, still working with sports clients, but then also broadening what I do with other brands. And I'm really excited about it because a lot of the lessons that I've brought into sports, I've taken from other industries and followed other industries. So, I love the phrase "steal with pride," finding out someone else's campaign and then putting your twist for your brand and your fans and your audience. So, a lot of the ideas and that I've presented with clients has been from someone else, whether it be, hey, can we? We've seen what Arsenal's done over here, or we've seen what the Boston Celtics have done, or we've seen, what the Portland Trailblazers has done. How can we take that, twist it, make it, localize it? How can we give it that flavour and run with it? So, that to me, there's a bit of a case. There is no new ideas. There's just old ideas reframed.
Yeah.
So I think I think both businesses will work well together in giving great results. If we have great results on a strategy piece and a project piece with Chunky, then I'll go, well, how can I take that success and apply it back to the sports market? So that's going to be my focus, especially in the first quarter of 2016. And then, the itch that I want to scratch the most is sort of blowing up this podcasting sort of space around getting a few more podcasts out there, work out how that operation can work. And the good thing is, I've had that idea for a while, and then you go and see Gimlet Media go and roll it out. And you go and see, Bill Simmons or Woj go and roll it out. So, like, the model, it's a bit proven already.
Yeah.
And so it's just a matter of seeing whether this market, the Australian market, can also handle that. So that's I'm going to put a lot on my plate, but I think this is going to be the year that I work the hardest.
That sounds brilliant. I think there's a couple of really good lessons you've said there as well about perspective and also that life experience, putting yourself into different situations to get, those interesting kind of ideas. And also, when you're talking about fan engagement, we're going to get into that now and get Sean's take on fan engagement as well. But this idea that you can use fan engagement principles and things like that across from Sports Geek to Chunky Media and what the clients are doing there and what brands are doing and things like that as well. So, but that's a key thing, I think, for people out there, isn't it? That idea of perspective and life experience and taking those things and you were saying twisting ideas and using them and repurposing different places.
That's why it's not just a tax write-off, and if anyone from the tax office is listening, when I do go overseas, that's why I do. And you've done the same.
Yep. Professional development, there's nothing beats it, does it?
But going and seeing what other people are doing, how they're activating stadiums, what they're doing. To me, that's interesting. I've got a bit of a hashtag for this year. More rooms, and going to more meetups, going to more events, meeting more people in different areas, because you just don't know where the opportunity or the ideas might be.
Absolutely.
And if you're constantly meeting the same people, going to the same things, then it can become stale. So for me, it's the only way I grow, by consuming mountains of stuff, and meeting a stack of people. To me, that's where success has come from.
Okay, fantastic. Well, now we're going to get into the fan engagement and talking about...
This could be the longest podcast ever.
This could be the longest podcast ever. Oh, well, it's going to be one, maybe if you go on a long-haul flight, you can put this on, listen to it a couple of times. So, Sean, a while back we had a bit of a chat about fan engagement, and you told me, "Oh, Blair, you need to shut up with the fan engagement. You talk about fan engagement too much."
We're
big fans. We're big fans of fan engagement.
I'm getting this transcribed, right? And I'll be able to do a word count on the amount of times that you said. Right. It could be if starting now, make it a drinking game. If you're at the pub, every time Blair says fan engagement, you have to scull your beer.
You'd be in hospital if you followed me on Twitter or something like that by the end of an hour or something.
No, so I mean, I guess my take on fan engagement, and why I said that, and it is a gentle dig, is that it is becoming a catch-all word for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But for mine, and I think the conversation I had with Pete Haldeman from ESPN and talking about the tennis world, for mine the fan engagement piece is the in-stadium piece, right? And is the fan activation and how you go about actually engaging the fans. And that's how I sort of see it traditionally, because it can get quite broad. And can you say, because again, if you were to poll 100 sports executives and say what is fan engagement, I think you get 100 different answers.
Yes, yeah.
And I guess that's my beef is the wrong word, and it's too strong, but it's like that's where I think it's tough to define.
Yes, yeah.
And I'm not saying that my definition is right, just that. I like the granularity of saying we're talking about stadium activations and, on-site activations, or we're talking about, a digital play or a social play or a sponsor lead play. Like there's more sophistication in there. And I guess, if fan engagement is becoming the bucket that everything lives under, that's fine. But, my issue is with everyone's different definition, right? And so if someone says, fan engagement, some people might think fan engagement is handing out flyers at the front of the stadium. Yeah. And other people might think fan engagement is encompassing every touch point of the customer journey across fans.
That's right. Yeah.
And to me, that's the piece, because, if someone says fan engagement, I sort of go, what is that to you? And I do get a lot of answers back. So that's where I dive into the granularity, And for mine, there's digital. There's the data component is fan engagement, because overlaps. Yeah. And then there's the activation component, and so that's where it sort of does fit, and that's where I see it sort of moving around. So that's my there's my take on the fan engagement thing. No,
that's brilliant, and what you've said is really valuable to learn as well, I think, and to hear that from you as well. In terms of where it is now, because fan engagement's been around for ages. I mean, when we think about
you got to get a drink every time Blair says fan engagement.
Exactly. This idea of looking after fans, I remember going to Broncos games, and you remember going to probably the Melbourne Tigers games. Yep. There was always something there, whether it was maybe a free trading card or something.
And that's the thing. It's sort of, to a certain degree, and I think I spoke about this with Shane on the podcast, it's sort of seen as a silver bullet.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, we're having trouble with crowds. Fan engagement is the way. And it's like, well, it's not necessarily, because we've had it in different levels.
Yeah.
Or, over time. And yes, talking to Anthony Everard and what they do at the Big Bash, right? They do a great crowd stadium experience, and they pitch it right to their market.
Yep.
Young kids, families, and they want fireworks, and they want loud music, and they want giveaways. And so that's their version of that. And so it's not just, it's not just a silver bullet. Like, and I think Shane said, it's, you could roll out all the tech in the world and allow people to order, hot dogs from their phone, but maybe the best fan engagement is craft beer in the stadium.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And so
we both agree with that right now. Yep,
yeah.
That's
So
right.
like, that's where it is, to me, it comes down to, cheeks on the seats, getting more people at the game, and making sure those people have an awesome time. So it comes down to that customer experience.
Yes.
And a newer term, at least in the marketing world, of experiential marketing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
sport's been in that forever, right? And primarily the product on the court or the floor or the ground has been the experience, right? If the product is right and everyone has a great time, and yes, the crowd ambience and things like that.
It's not
makes
just
the
sports.
Game,
That's the thing. Yeah.
So that's where the best fan engagement in the world can be. The product on the floor is the best there is, and that's why you think it's awesome. So sometimes it's, you don't want to add too much around it. It's like just make sure that the experience and the user experience for the whole event is of top notch, and that's the best thing you can do from a fan engagement.
That's right, because it's not just, I guess, we talk a lot about millennials, who I guess are very digital savvy and like to see all these kind of fan engagement related digital fan engagement related things. That was 2 in 1 there. But the idea that there's traditional fans that just want. I remember I was at Everton a few years ago and had a good meeting there, and they were telling me about all the little things they do for the older fans, the fans in their 80s and 70s and that, who just want the Bovril and the pie and the game, and that's it. And they don't want all the other stuff around that. They just want great customer service, which I think so much of this fan experience, fan engagement comes back to great customer service at the stadium or at the team training session or whatever it is. Looking after those fans and trying to see what can we do here that's going to give them a bit of extra bang for their buck, and
and make the experience better. So if it's like, if it's like the 49ers with the 9 nerds, that are telling everyone how to connect to the app and how to connect to the Wi-Fi and how to use the app appropriately.
That's right.
That is a big piece of making that customer experience awesome, and having people rave about it. And so, that's a key component for me, because that's what sports is now in the entertainment and the time business of time, right? If time is so valuable these days, and we're asking people to come to our event, our stadium, for 2, 3, 4, 8 hours for the day, right? And so the cost of time has gone up, right? We don't have time.
The quality of beer and the alcohol strength of beer has gone down and continues to go down.
But that's the compelling thing, right? We don't have time. That's why everything's time shifted, and we don't, the attention is going. So that's the challenge for sports. We need to make sure that the experience is worth the time that you have to put in to take it in. So that's always our challenge. And if digital can help supplement that, if digital can help drive that reason to be there and make that compelling, that's what you've got to do.
Okay, there's virtual reality, there's iBeacons, they're doing biometric screening of, getting fans in the gates faster in the US and things like that. This whole realm, this whole world of fan engagement and fan experience is continuing to take off and in technology, I guess. Where do you see it going this year? What's going to be, we keep hearing potentially it's virtual reality for this year kind of thing. What's your take on all this and where we're going in 2016 and onwards? I think VR will get some love this year. Everything I've heard of people, putting on Oculus Rift, the fact that Facebook is behind Oculus Rift, the fact that the 360 video type of thing, Tom Halls from who's now with Formula E, the electric Grand Prix, they've done some 360 videos on the car, and you can effectively feel like you're in the car. That's cool. You can only imagine when you put the headset on and see that. I think as the price of that comes down, I think that'll be really good. Again, it's going to come down to what digital rights the TV will loosen up on that. I think that will be part of it. There's a tendency, we don't want it to be the next Google Glass. Where it's just a novelty. Absolutely,
Which there is, there's an opportunity for that. I think smarter stadiums are here to stay, and are only going to get smarter. So things like, facial recognition and line management, like the guys at Wait Time, that detect how long the lines are and direct where staff should be and that kind of thing, to in-seat ordering and probably more so the in-seat upgrades and stuff like that. I think that's good. Beacons are still in the case of how can we best use them. I think in my conversation with Mark Cuban, you don't want them to be pocket spam.
Right.
Because as soon as they are, they'll be tuned out. So
that's right.
You want to be able to make them a valid use case.
So
I think they're going to be the main things. I think data is going to be like if there's a growing area, it's in the data side, so Seat has the 3 tracks of technology and digital and data with the CRM guys, and I think the tech guys are getting their stuff together.
Yeah.
Like the Wi-Fi and the DAS is not a do we do it? It's like when do we do it?
Yeah.
So the technology of the stadiums are rising, which allows the digital guys to be running cool things. So you can run, you can ask people to take a Snapchat, or you can get them to do an Instagram photo because you've got capacity.
Yeah.
So it gives the digital execs capacity to do things. And I think the next bit is that 360-degree view of the fan, getting more data about them, getting more customized around how we present them offers, whether it's via the app, via Facebook, via email. I think email is terribly unsexy, but it's still massive.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
So I think the real advantage will be in getting more people to understand that data side. So people who can slice and dice your data, segment it, and provide value back to ticketing or merchandise or your sponsors. I think that's where there's still a lot of work being done. And there's a lot of upside there. So it might not be, here's a new cool tool. It's just like, if we can understand our data better and tie that to what we're doing from a digital point of view, or selling tickets, that's where there is, and when people say, I want to get into sports, I want to do this, and didn't mean to do the silly voice, but they want to be on air, right? Or I want to interview the athletes, which is fine, coming from a journalistic background. But if someone said, I want to work in sports, I would go, learn data, learn the data analytics side, be an Excel ninja, right? That kind of thing, because that is the space.
That's a good tip,
that you could really do well in. And it might be, you can't jump in and be that, but go and work in ticketing and learn, and work on learning how to crunch data and numbers and best use it, using tools like Tableau and things like that. If you can get your head around those kind of things, then you've got some, real value. Yeah,
that's really interesting. I mean, if you had to hypothesize, especially I want to say hypothesize, because in 10 years' time, potentially, where, our stadiums could be, or where our teams will be, what they might be doing in this space. Just this week, the Drone Racing League showed off some of their stuff there, and esports continues to rise rapidly and bringing a closer connection between fans and I guess real athletes as well, kind of thing. Where are we going to be in 10 years if you had to put your hat on?
I mean, like I said, 10. Sports Geek is now not 7 years, so 10 years is a long time.
Yeah, and you said about dog years with digital. And
so
that
10 years is like 30 years in the digital space or more. And if you go back 7 years, 7 years ago, Twitter just started. Instagram didn't exist. Snapchat didn't exist. So first of all, just park it with that.
Yeah.
I think teams will become more media savvy. I think there'll be more options of direct to consumer, right? What the MLB is doing, selling its content straight to the fans.
Yep.
I think TV is going to be further and further disrupted. And is there going to be a tipping point where digital is more effective and brings in more revenue than TV?
Yeah.
I think that's going to be something to happen. We've seen I've spoken about the WWE moving to that model. Is someone going to pull the trigger and do the Netflix for sports?
Yeah, that's right.
Right? There's a lot of players in there. So I think it's going to be from the broadcast point of view down on where that happens. But I think sports is in a really strong position because live still drives a lot of things in the media.
Yeah.
Twitter only exists for sports.
Yeah.
Right? And events. Right? If there's not a live event, people aren't going to Twitter that often. But when live is on, Twitter just fires up.
That's right, yeah.
But does Facebook's sports stadium replicate that experience and become the thing? So I think it does revolve around broadcast. I mean, they've got 10 years to catch up legally. But that said, you've got leagues like the NBA have just done a 10-year deal, of mega dollars, right? So, is there end in sight in those figures? Because in the end, money talks.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. As much as we go, we just want to go direct to consumer and get $40 or $50 or $300 a year, whatever the number is in your price point. It can't compare if a Rupert Murdoch or a Ted Turner or in Australia's case, a Channel 9 or a Channel 10 plonks down $1 billion, right? It's Mike Myers kind of stuff, Austin Powers, 1 million, 1 billion, so that's it. It does come down to that, but I think that's the place that's of most disrupt, ability to disrupt, because we're already seeing that in local markets, and a lot of the providers are able to stream, via their apps and that kind of thing. If you're a partner with the local cable company and that kind of thing, so I think that's going to be the biggest space. I'm not going to make any rash predictions of there's going to be another MySpace mashed up with Snapchat, mashed up with Instagram, because I'm sure there will be.
Do you still have your MySpace accounts?
I never was a MySpace person.
I think mine's on page 87 of Google search or something.
So it is a bit tougher to predict, but I think from a team and a league point of view, I think the importance of digital as the communication channel for the league or the team, and the ability to communicate with your fans, I think that will just continue to grow. Yeah. And I guess being digital will be a service provider to every business unit of a team. You'll help them sell tickets, you'll help them sell merchandise, you'll help fill sponsorships, you'll help keep the fans informed. So I think that's the key piece. That's only going to get bigger. Yeah, no. Well, look, brilliant discussion there about fan engagement. Now, if you have been taking shots at home, we hope that you've got medical assistance there to be able to call. We'd love to know how many times I did mention fan engagement. I think it's probably over about 4,000 by now. Yep. But that drives home Sean's message earlier in that piece as well. Now, to finish off, we've got a couple of other little bits here as well, but I wanted to talk a bit about business and career kind of stuff as well, in terms of how do you keep your skills relevant in what you're doing here in sports and with Sports Geek as well? All right, fair warning for James. Can you bleep this? All right. I read loads of stuff. I consume a tremendous amount of content, both in the sports space and in the non-sports space. I use a few different tools to do that, and subscribe to a stack of newsletters. But I consume a lot. Yeah. Some in podcast form for professional reasons, some for personal, stuff. But I do try to keep across a lot of things. A lot of links that are coming by. If you follow me on Twitter or, if we're connected on LinkedIn, you'll see most of them, because if I read it, it goes up on the feed. If I read it and I don't like it, I don't share it. And that lifelong learning part's a big part of yours as well. Pretty much. Continuing to learn, and because I'm always out looking there for the new thing, and it's not all me. So I have trusted advisors, I guess, or key people that I follow that I go, I know when Shane Harmon shares something, I have to read it. So it's that kind of thing that I always, keep an eye on. So that's pretty much my professional. But then the other side of it is back to that events, going to conferences like SEAT is, really valuable as much as I get up and speak. It's the conversations that I have with people outside that. Yeah. And then the other thing is the podcast itself is my business development. Yeah. Business and professional development, right? So business development in that it potentially brings in sales and leads for more consulting gigs, but then it's also I'm getting to chat to someone about what they do, how they do it, which is really valuable to me. And that has a flow-on effect, though, as well, because that's an educational resource that other people are tapping into as well. So it's like it lets me learn about what they're doing, but it lets me also have my take on what they're doing, and people probably have heard me say, you know, oh, can you help me with this? I go, yeah, I've got a podcast for that, and I can point them in that direction.
Absolutely.
So the podcast is very much a key component of my professional development.
All right, last question before we get into a top 10 Fast 10. Questions about you. Now, you started off by talking about your career and how you got started.
Yep.
If you were young again, or if you were to give some advice...
Who says I'm old, Blair?
I see a couple of greys there. I was, all right, okay, all right.
You're only as young as the person you feel.
If you had to give some advice to a young person starting out in the sports business, what would it be? A couple of tips, a couple of small things.
So I loved Mark Cuban's advice because I asked him this question and he said, don't. He said, it's too hard. And he did give the same advice around data. I think that is really good advice, right? If you want to cruise in and think this is going to be awesome, you're going to hang out at sports events and that's not sports. It's a lot of hard work. It's losing weekends. It's long hours. It's underpaid. But if you are passionate about, you want to be for mine, and again, this is I think Ted Johnson from the Minnesota Timberwolves, a good mate of mine who's a CMO. You have to be passionate about the business, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to be a jock sniffer.
Yeah.
You don't want to be someone who just wants to hang around the athletes because they get found out really quickly. Whereas if you are passionate about the business, if you're passionate about selling tickets or delivering great content,
digital,
or
everything,
that space, then it's a great place because you've got, from a digital point of view, you've got the best content subject.
Absolutely.
Right? If you're working for a sports team, stacks of content, stacks of stories there. Ability to tell stories and storytelling is awesome. If you go to a brand, that's a lot tougher, right? And you've got this fanatical, loyal fan base that's there. So that's the real big upside. But you've got to just work hard and don't pitch yourself in to a position that you think you're ready for or that you think you'd be good at. Take the position that's there. Right? So, I want to work in this spot and I want to do that role. You've got to go and do the time. Whether that's interning or... there is no instant gratification. You've got to go and do the time, whether it's, in my case, community radio or game day volunteering or all of that stuff. If you want to get into sports, a lot of roles don't get advertised, and the easiest thing to do is to hire the person that's already there. So be that person.
And you're right there, get your hands dirty. That's such a key thing. It's not going to happen overnight getting into a dream job or something like that in the sports industry. I mean, do the things that, like you said, you've done and, you've heard a bit of what I've done and other people out there as well. It's about doing those little types of things to get a wealth of knowledge across different areas of a sports team or a stadium to be able to, know how to draw on those key sort of areas when it comes time to working that job.
You'd be surprised the amount of people that I've interviewed on the podcast that either in the pre-interview or even just talking on the show, they have set up marquees before the game. They have, taken down inflatable castles, that have been activated and that kind of stuff. All they've worn. There's been a few, and I'll keep the identities protected. There's been a few that have put on mascot outfits and run around the stadium, that's right. And that's what you've got to do.
Well, shout out to Yeronga AFL club up in Brisbane there. I used to sell programs when I was 9 years old, and I think I got 10 cents per program, walked away with $4 one weekend. Like, it was still enough for a pie and a Coke or something, I think. But, okay, we're gonna fire off into the final bit of this, a fast minute. I've got 10 questions here. You've not seen them. You're basically just going to tell me your first response, okay? So, favourite team?
That'll have to be Collingwood.
Favourite sporting moment?
Well, that's caught on YouTube. That's me dancing at the 2010 grand final after Alan Didak kicked a goal in the replay and end up on Channel 7 and the Pies win the flag. So.
Oh, fantastic. Favourite sport to play?
I'm still, even post Achilles injury, I still prefer to play basketball as my sport of choice.
Fair enough. Favourite sport to watch?
AFL or basketball. That's tough. AFL is a game that must be consumed live, but I do watch a lot of basketball. All
right, best food item you've had at a stadium at a game?
Actually, I now ask this of my guests, and Mike Connolly gave the best answer. he said, "Is beer a food?" And
absolutely.
And I said, "Yes, it is. It is a food." I think I'm going to go iconic is the Dodger dog at LA and at LA Dodgers. But I also can't go past a meat pie sauce at the MCG.
Nah, too easy. Best jersey you own?
Best jersey I own?
Favourite jersey, yeah.
I'll probably go down. It'll probably be my first jersey. Isaiah Thomas. I'm a Detroit Pistons fan from way back in the day, so I've got an Isaiah Thomas home jersey.
That's awesome. You only have $10 to spend at a match. What do you buy?
I don't think you can buy anything at a match for $10 these days. I'd probably buy a beer.
A beer, yeah. Well, you might get some change. You might get $1 or $2.
Yep.
Okay. What were your best sports stats in real life?
My best. I wasn't. I mean, the cricket one is a good one.
4 for 12 was that, wasn't it? Yeah.
But I think probably in my basketball heyday, playing A grade here in Melbourne and Hawthorn, we won 3 titles on the trot, and I was point guard of those teams. I was pretty much shooting a few threes and making sure the big guys got fed. So, not looking at stats, but winning 3 titles on the trot's not bad.
That's a good one. All right, so that was best stats in real life. What about best sports stats in gaming?
In gaming,
yeah,
as a
FIFA,
gamer,
yeah.
No, I'm not a gamer.
You're not a gamer. All right, fine. Moving on. That's fine. Well, next time. Fantastic. All right, Sean, that was the top 10, just to finish that off, to get a bit more sports knowledge for people out there as well. But thanks for being able to be a great interview subject. I hope that's an educational kind of thing for people out there as well, to be able to learn a bit more about how this all started and your journey in this as well, and where it's all going in fan engagement. That's another one. Maybe stop drinking now.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much, Blair. So we're doing the shaking of hands, which doesn't really work on a podcast. So for people to tweet you and say, Blair, I'm massively drunk, where can people find you?
You can find me at Mr. Blair Hughes. The reason it's at Mr. Blair Hughes or Mr. Blair Hughes is because I used to be a teacher, so I used to obviously be Mr. Hughes or whatnot, or just Blair. So at Mr. Blair Hughes or www.mrblairhughes.com. You'll always see me on
So
Twitter and all that.
are you on the Snapchat?
I'm not into Snapchat yet. I have to get more into it. I'm doing another US trip coming up soon. I'm going to try that Dodger dog when I go to a Dodgers game in April. But I'm going to try more of it
by
there.
the time this is published, Blair is going to be on Snapchat. I will share Blair's Snapchat handle in the show notes. But please, if you're listening to this now and you're rolling around drunk because Blair said fan engagement, I think I counted 36 or 37 times.
I think more than that. Yep.
Please send us a snap. Sean Callanan is my handle. And if you've got through this, congratulations. I think this raises the bat as the longest podcast that I've done, but that's fine. Sometimes length is important and going into a bit of depth. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast, but providing the facility to interview me, because it would have been weird if I'd have done it myself.
Look, happy to share this story and get this out there, and it's brilliant.
All right. You've been listening to the Sports Geek podcast. If you haven't left a review, I think I'm up to about 90 odd. I'd love to crack the 100. Please go to sportsgeekhq.com/iTunes. Until next time I do a podcast, my name is Sean Callanan from Sports Geek, and you've been listening to the Sports Geek podcast.
Like the Sports Geek podcast? Find us on Facebook.com/SportsGeek. Check out which teams work with Sports Geek at SportsGeekHQ.com/clients. Please leave a review on iTunes. Go to SportsGeekHQ.com/iTunes. Thanks for listening to the Sports Geek podcast.